the argument from possibility a viable way to presume the existence of a god? Well, no, of course it isn't, but this time around, we're going to look at what it is and why it fails so badly, because this, like all religious philosophical arguments, is based completely on fee-fees and not reality. Because these people are really allergic to reality. And that's why they're so ridiculously laughable. Today, we're going to take a look at a video from Apologetics Squared, and if there was a clearer example of the bald irrationality of the religious, I don't know what that might be. This is really why I keep pointing out that philosophy is the absolute wrong tool for the job that they're trying to do if you're trying to look at reality, which, of course, the religious never really do they? Because they really don't care about the real world, only about their emotionally comfortable beliefs, and those, once you really look at them, they seem to be completely made up, mostly because they are. So strap in, because this is going to be a complete disaster. Don't say I didn't warn you.
The argument from possibility. Here's a question: what does it mean for something to be possible?
Well, it means that within the realm of things that could actually happen in the real world, it happens to be part of that set. Now, I know that sounds like a strange definition, but it actually gets worse. We can only judge if something is possible based on our current understanding of what we think is actually possible in reality. 500 years ago, nobody would have thought that it was possible to fly. Today, we do it all the time. Nobody would have thought that we could move as fast as we do on the highway. Nobody would have had the slightest clue what a highway was. Nobody could have imagined that you could have every piece of human knowledge in the palm of your hand. Possibilities change, but the one important factor to remember is that the time to accept that something is in fact possible is when you have the evidence at hand to see it to fruition.
When I say, it's possible for me to start a garden, what am I saying? Well, there's a bunch of theories about what possibility really is, but they're mostly pretty weird.
And this is where I think we're going to see him start equivocating and trying to needlessly complicate the question so that when he gets to his God belief, it doesn't sound quite so outlandish. If you notice, that happens a lot in philosophy, doesn't it? So no, possibility isn't really weird, you just have to accept that it is inherently a rather sloppy term, and yeah, I don't think he likes that much.
One nice theory is that something is possible if and only if there's a causal power which could bring it about.
And I might buy that if, and only if, you could draw a direct, demonstrable causal link between the actual causal power and the thing that's supposed to be doing all the causing. You can propose that invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies could do a thing, but I wouldn't buy it until, first, you can prove that pixies are real, and second, you can show that they're actually capable of doing the thing that you are claiming that they can do. And that's really where the religious get into trouble, because they can't actually demonstrate anything when it comes to their imaginary friends. So sure, prove your cause, prove your effect, and we'll see. I don't think they're going to actually get anywhere fast because, they aren't going to really even try.
So the garden is possible because something, me, has the power to bring about the garden.
In fact, you're not even necessary in that situation. We know that plants grow completely on their own. They don't need any help from us. They were here long before we evolved, and they're likely to be here long after we're gone. Of course, that depends on how you're going to define garden and all of that. If you say a garden is a series of plants laid out in a pattern as you determine, then yeah, of course, you are necessary because you've defined yourself into the equation. I've got a feeling he's going to try something like that coming up, but let's see.
Here's another question. What kinds of things are possible?
Again, we can answer only based on what we know at the moment and what we experience in the real world, but I'd say, at least at the moment, that only material things are in fact possible, based on the fact that we have never, ever seen anything that is, as the religious say, immaterial. Because what does that word even mean, and how would you go about proving it? Now, I suspect that our definitions are going to be at odds, and that would mean he'd have to demonstrate that his definition was reasonable. And I have a feeling that if he ever were to try that, that would be a hoot.
Well, it's usually thought that lots of things are possible, something our ability to conceive or imagine things acts as a guide to what is possible.
And that's absolutely wrong. I can imagine lots of things that are absolutely not possible in demonstrable reality. And of course, here's where the religious go completely off the rails because they are using their imaginations as a gauge of what can happen without realizing that what they want, that doesn't actually mean a thing. I can imagine going faster than the speed of light. I might really want to do it, but at least so far as we are currently aware, remember, everything is limited by what we actually know at the moment. Going faster than the speed of light is simply impossible. So, if he's going to rely on this, he's going to make a complete fool of himself. Because what else is new?
For example, is it possible for a turtle corn to exist? It seems so.
Why does it seem so? I mean, I guess that someday we might be able to genetically modify a turtle to have a horn. I guess there could be a turtle out there somewhere who, either through injury or some kind of random mutation, might have something vaguely resembling a horn, but what does that actually mean? What are the characteristics of this supposed turtle corn? Does that mean that we'll have a turtle with the magical powers of a unicorn? Because if that's the case, then no, a turtle corn is simply not possible because unicorns are simply not possible. This is what I mean by tempering our imagination with what is actually so in reality, and when it comes to the religious, they don't seem to know how to do that.
What about 2 turtle corns? Yeah, 3 turtle corns. I don't see any problem with that, and it seems we could keep going on like this to infinity.
And this is where we can see that he's not really thinking rationally at all. You can't just make things up in your head and, because you're not being skeptical or rational, just shrug your shoulders and say, well, why the hell not? Because this will come back to bite him in the ass later on, I suspect. But let's see.
But if we think that possible things needed causal powers that could bring them about, then we would need a causal power corresponding to every one of those infinitely many possibilities to be able to bring them about. That's bad because we shouldn't posit an infinity of existing things if we could avoid it.
We shouldn't posit anything unless we can demonstrate that it's actually realistic to suspect. In the example that I gave above, I said that we might be able to cook up a turtle corn in a lab somewhere, and that would, in effect, require a causal power. It would require us. Yet, the other possibility, that is just that something happened out in nature somewhere, and that doesn't have a causal power, at least not one that intended for that outcome to come about. And that all depends on, ultimately, how you're defining your terms, which our theist here isn't doing at all. And it's why they tend to run into trouble.
Fortunately, we can avoid it in this case by positing a single entity which has all those causal powers.
In other words, you can just make something up. Because ultimately, that's what all of this comes down to. He can make up gods. I can make up invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. And what does any of that actually mean? Where does it demonstrably get you? Because it gets you absolutely nowhere, because none of it is demonstrably real. It's all trading on your imagination, but your imagination does not demonstrably translate into reality. Anyone can just invent something out of whole cloth, and in fact, people have been doing that since the beginning of history. That's why there are so many gods being proposed and bowed down to and having their asses kissed. And the problem is, none of them are demonstrably real. And I bet our theist here, he'll never recognize that, will he?
If there was a being with unlimited power, it would allow us to maintain that things are possible in virtue of there being a power which can bring it about, and also that lots of things are possible, just as it seems.
And you notice that he goes running right back to that classical theist whipping horse, if. If there is an all-powerful entity, then all of this stuff could happen. Yeah, okay. Well, if a frog had wings, he wouldn't bump his ass on the ground when he hopped. Big deal. If doesn't mean anything. You can invent absolutely anything so that you can get out of your problems. But that doesn't mean that the thing that you made up actually means anything. I don't care about if. I care about is. Come back when you have evidence that your magical all-powerful bugaboo is real. We'll wait, because we're not moving on until you can do that.
Now, this being, as the grounding for all possibility, would need to exist in all possible worlds.
Says who? Because this guy is so far from anything basically grounded in reality that I don't think you can see it from where he is anymore. And this is where I said it was going to come back to bite him in the ass, because if he can just make things up, so can we. Maybe, and remember, we're just making things up here, just like he is, there's a monster out there somewhere that eats all-powerful entities. That's all it does, all day long, is hunt for all-powerful beings, and down the gullet they go. As such, there are no all-powerful things at all, by definition, because they've all been eaten. There can't be, because the monster has, by definition, eaten them all. Prove me wrong. And this is really what happens when you rely on philosophy and you don't have a clue what goes on outside of it, because philosophy is the wrong tool for the job. You can't just make things up and pretend you're getting anywhere. Yet the religious, they don't really have a choice, do they? Because there is no reality to any of the things they believe. This is all they have. And this is why it's all so absurdly stupid.
Thus, there is a necessarily existing infinitely powerful entity, which sounds suspiciously like God.
And thus, he makes the ludicrous leap from if to therefore it's true, without passing go and without collecting $200. I mean, the amount of absurdity here is just ridiculous, and the religious just look at it like, duh, I don't see anything at all wrong with it. Well, of course not, because you're just desperately trying to get to your emotionally comforting conclusion without ever having to think about it very hard, or let's be honest, at all. And in fact, that's why there is a logical fallacy that deals with this kind of thing called the appeal to possibility. It's what happens when a conclusion is assumed, not because it's probably true or because it hasn't been proven to be impossible, but because the adherent desperately wants it to be true, no matter how ridiculously improbable. Sometimes it looks like the religious are out perusing the logical fallacies just to see if they give them any more ideas. But this is Apologetics Squared we're talking about here, so I guess I really shouldn't be that surprised. They're not any worse than people like William Lane Craig. They're just not as good at covering their tracks. So anyway, what did you think? Was this as painfully obvious as I presented it? Let me know in the comments. Is there any way for the theist to get back on track? I honestly don't think so, but I don't think they care either. If you have other suggestions though, let me know below.
Boom, dicky, 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 boom.